David. So, welcome to our podcast, The Artist, and thank you for joining in again. It's so wonderful to see you in person finally, and after too many years. So, thank you for taking our time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
David, sir, we were exchanging mails on a few things, and one thing that really struck me was to get into this conversation with you on Pure Cinema, because you've written so much about Hitchcock and written so much about Godard. So when we talk about Pure Cinema, how would you explain this to a layperson?
Well, the thing about pure cinema that is difficult is that there is really no one single definition of that term. Alfred Hitchcock absolutely used it, and I think very rightly so. And what he meant by that was the power to move audiences not through just what the story was, not through just what the acting was, not just through what the dialogue was, etc., but rather through purely cinematic means. In other words, the images, the pictures, the camera work, the editing, the sound, all of that by itself was what he considered pure cinema. Now, that is just one way of defining the term. I think Psycho is maybe the very best example of what Hitchcock was able to achieve with pure cinema, his great film of 1960. But there are other ways of defining the term as well. Would you like me to go into that a little bit?
Yes, please. Yes, yes.
Well, the whole thing probably started way back when movies were very, very new, way back in the 1920s, when in France there were a number of filmmakers and people who theorized about film and critics who were very interested in medium specificity. That is, what is it that only cinema can do that is specific to movies? It doesn't come from literature. It doesn't come from theater. It doesn't come from painting. It's just what movies can do by themselves. And when they tried to find out what that was, they called that cinema pur, pure cinema. And what they meant by that was basically another way of putting it would be abstract cinema. Sometimes there would be images of things you could recognize. And yeah, then the idea was to put them together with a kind of a musical flow without worrying about literal meaning. Other times the films would literally be abstract, just shapes, forms, maybe colors when it was possible to do color efficiently, all by itself. So again, pure cinema can be anything from really abstract cinema where you see nothing but shapes and forms and there's no story, there's no characters, there's nothing like that. Or there might be characters, there might be people, places, and things, but not organized in a regular sort of a story form. The idea is to just get pleasure out of the way these things are arranged in themselves. Or you can have the way Alfred Hitchcock used the term, which is you have a real movie, you know, the kind of thing you'd go see on Saturday night at the multiplex nowadays, where there were stories and characters and dialogue and all of that. But where he felt he was getting the most effect on the audience was through purely camera work, editing, and sound. And that was what he considered pure cinema.
Wow. So when we talk about Hitchcock and pure cinema in the context of entertainment and suspense, which touched the lives of so many people, and he's still considered, one of the most important influential filmmakers. Mm-hmm. How would you elaborate on that?
Well, one of the amazing things about Hitchcock, I don't think there's any other filmmaker that has as much as he does to this day, the combination of being able to appeal to an enormously wide range of regular, everyday, casual moviegoers who love his films, yeah, and being able to appeal to scholars and critics. The shelf of books about Hitchcock, many of them very, very serious academic books, is wider than for any other filmmaker who has ever lived. So he was able to appeal to both regular audiences and the most serious philosophical scholars of film. So that's unique to Hitchcock. I think nobody else has equaled him in that respect. And, I mentioned a movie before, Psycho from 1960, and I really think that's the best example in commercial cinema of what pure cinema can be. And I'll mention one part of the movie. It's a little bit before halfway through the movie, but we have I'm going to give a little bit of a spoiler here, but we have a terrible murder that takes place. A woman is stabbed to death in a shower in a motel. So that's going on. And then after that, we have a long sequence where the murderer cleans, well, we don't know he's the murderer yet, but where somebody comes in and cleans up after the killing. So the killing itself is done in an enormously fast flurry of shots, something like 70 of them in like less than a minute. I don't remember the exact figures, but you have one shot after another so fast the eye can hardly take them in. In a way, what you're seeing is everything. You're seeing this horrible killing take place before your eyes. In another way, you're seeing nothing because everything is gone from before your eyes so quickly before you almost even have time to register it. So what you get is the impression of having seen a horrible, violent murder. Hitchcock was very proud of the fact that even though you have this scene of a woman being stabbed to death, you never see the knife go into her body. You never see that. He was very proud of that. You're sure you've seen this woman be horribly murdered, but you never actually see her being horribly murdered. But she was horribly murdered. So that's one pure cinema scene. Yes, it has plot elements. We know why this woman is being killed, sort of. We know where she's being killed. We see the killing, but it's so almost abstract that it's not about seeing Janet Leigh do a bunch of acting. In fact, some of it wasn't even Janet Leigh. It was a double for her body. But you're seeing just this flurry of images. Then after that, you have, for several minutes, this person comes in and cleans up after the murder, cleans away the blood, gets rid of the corpse, and so forth. This is absolutely not very dramatic storytelling. We're watching somebody for several minutes clean up a bathroom. That's basically what it comes to. So, okay. However, audiences sit and watch this absolutely spellbound by it. They can't take their eyes off it. So this is another kind of pure cinema. We're watching something take place on the screen, but it's not very interesting, but we can't stop looking at it because we're wondering if something else will happen, and we're fascinated with how this will be done. So this, I think, these two things, which are right back to back in the movie, the killing and then the cleanup, are absolutely pure cinema, as close as you can get in commercial movie making.
And so when he actually thought about weaving pure cinema in a very entertaining way for the audience, and hooking the audience, it's not an easy thing to visualize and to get those striking visuals which will appeal to the audience and be in this commercial space. Because you've done so much work on Hitchcock, how was Hitchcock thinking? What he might be thinking at that point while he was designing these shots and while he was saying, this is how I want to do it?
Well, I think, first of all, Hitchcock, throughout his career, back to his earliest days making silent movies in England, always loved technical challenges. So I think the challenge of putting a scene like this into a movie, and this was 1960 when the movies in America and elsewhere were still very heavily censored. So he knew he was going to be showing a lot of violence, especially in the scene I've been talking about here. But he also knew he had to get it past the censors. That's one of the things he was thinking of. He said, and I'm not sure I really believe this, but he once said he made the movie in black and white because it would be just too bloody if it was in color with all that blood spilling out. So he said he made the movie in black and white. I think there were other reasons. However, he knew he was taking a tremendous risk with this film. It was going to be breaking a lot of boundaries. So he wanted to be as safe as he could. Making it in black and white not only would help him get it past the censors, it would also keep the budget lower than filming it in color in those days. So that's one of the things he was thinking about. The other big thing I think he was thinking about is that, as he put it himself, he felt that when he was at his best doing pure cinema, he could play the audience like you play a musical instrument, like you play an organ or you play a piano. In other words, by putting that stuff up there on the screen in exactly the right way, he could get the audience to respond in exactly the ways he wanted them to respond. So that was a lot of the fun for him. He was really interested in manipulating the audience, in getting the audience to feel moment to moment exactly the way he wanted them to. And on this occasion, he did it through what we're both calling pure cinema. It's not 100% pure. It's not abstract, but it is very, very close to that. Let me mention another movie which he made shortly before Psycho,
Yeah.
and that is Vertigo,
Yeah.
which many people consider, probably including me, to be Hitchcock's greatest film, and which has very often won surveys, international surveys, for being the greatest film ever made anywhere. So, Vertigo. Vertigo actually has some moments which are abstract. There are moments during the opening credits when you're just seeing abstract shapes moving across the screen, curls and curves and spirals and things like that, like in a geometry book or something. But they're mesmerizing, and they get you into the mood of the film, which is meant to be mesmerizing. And then later on, there's a dream sequence in the film, a nightmare sequence, really, which is not purely abstract, but it also comes close. So that's a very different kind of a movie from Psycho. Has a slower pace. The story is more far-fetched, I think. But that's another case where Hitchcock really tried to get as close as he could to pure cinema. I still think that Psycho is the best example of them all.
So, tell me, David, sir, because you have so closely gone inside Hitchcock's life, he was constantly thinking of the audience while he was writing his script, while he was thinking of his story ideas, while he was, so you also used the word he wanted to audience to react the way exactly how he wanted them to react. So he was manipulating the emotions and feelings of the audience at that point. I've had many people on my podcast, and in terms of the artists, and I have asked many of them that do they think about the audience when they write a script? This is a question often asked to a filmmaker as well when they are pitching their films, that who is your audience?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
with your experience of writing and knowing so many other filmmakers, including Godard, including writing about Scorsese, how much should a filmmaker really think about the audience when they are putting their work across?
It is such an interesting question. Uh, on one level, every filmmaker should think about the audience because movies are very expensive to make, even today, when you
Yeah,
can make them on video and you don't have to run celluloid film through your camera. It still
yeah,
costs a lot of money to make a feature film. So,
yeah,
if people don't come to see your movie, you're not going to make that money back and you are not going to be able to make any more movies.
yeah,
So on that level, yeah, movies are an expensive medium. As Woody Allen once said, that the only art form where one of your creative tools is big money. So
yeah,
you have to get the audience to keep coming in to see at least most of your movies, if not every
yeah,
single one. So on
yeah,
that level, yes. On the other level, though, when Hitchcock was thinking about manipulating the audience, he was thinking very much about the audience. And he was thinking about the pleasure that he would get out of having audiences respond to things that came out of his imagination in the ways that he imagined them doing it. So he was thinking, I think, very much about the audience. Now, there are some other filmmakers who don't think so much about the audience.
yeah,
Jean-Luc Godard is an excellent example of that. He really did not seem to give much of a hang about what the audience was going to think. And it
yeah,
became very difficult for him to make a lot of his movies because he had to still raise money someplace or other. And after a while, he realized he was going to be able to keep going, but he was going to be on the fringe. He was going to be on the fringe of international cinema. He was never going to get out of the fringe, and he could make his money. I mean, get the money to make his movies. I once asked him about that, and he
yeah,
said he still had a name, and there were still studios who would like to sort of connect with his name every once in a while. So
yeah,
they would give him enough money to make a very low budget film, and he'd be able to make it. And then it didn't matter so much whether many people saw it or not. So
yeah,
he was a special case. He was able to keep going right up long into his 90s, as a matter of fact.
yeah,
But he knew that he was never going to be, if he ever was in the first place, in the mainstream of filmmaking. So, there's a huge range. You have maybe an occasional Godard who doesn't think about making the audience happy. And then you have filmmakers like Hitchcock who are able to combine making audiences happy with being very advanced and experimental in cinema technique.
Which is very, very, very rare, because if you ask any filmmaker, like even Tarantino constantly quotes that a filmmaker should make a film for themselves first.
Mm.
It should be a film that you want to go and watch first. I have never heard any other filmmaker, at least it's not coming immediately to my mind, saying that, okay, you need to think about the audience in every single beat of the film. And I think, do you think Hitchcock thought like that?
Well, I mean, for some filmmakers, I think maybe it's not every single beat of the film.
Yeah.
But again, somewhere in their mind, they're going to have that audience they're thinking of the audience. Filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino and Martin Scorsese, who have made, hugely popular films, especially in the case of Tarantino. I think his taste is so similar to the kind of audience he wants to get out to. He can make a movie that he just wants to see and know that there are jillions of other people out there who will also want to see it. Some other filmmakers don't really have that. They can't anticipate so much what the audience is going to like. So they maybe have to think more consciously of the audience or take a real chance by not thinking so much of the audience and just hoping that things come out okay in the end. Again, there's an enormously wide spectrum, and it ranges probably all the way from filmmakers who don't worry about the audience too much to filmmakers who think about the audience all the time and think, I want to make one big hit after another, and that's really what matters to me. There's one other area of cinema we haven't really talked about, and this is where you really find pure cinema, and that is the avant-garde, the experimental film. And these are movies which, for the most part, are not made with audiences in mind at all. And they're
Yes.
also not made to be shown in movie theaters. The
Yes.
filmmakers are very happy if they ever are shown in movie theaters, but they are meant to be shown in museums and classrooms and places like that. And nowadays, you can get them on the internet. Or maybe
Yeah.
on one of the platforms that shows art films, But
Yeah.
there you will find filmmakers who make movies which are purely pure cinema, which may not have any story, any characters, any maybe even sound at all, just a flow of images. Before I mentioned, when we started talking, those French filmmakers back in the 1920s, they felt that the other art medium closest to film was not literature where you have stories, was not painting where you have pictures, it was music. And they really wanted to have their images flowing across the screen in a musical way. And that is the way that some of today's avant-garde experimental filmmakers do it. They're interested in creating a kind of visual music, and they're not worried about telling stories at all. Now, again, those movies are not expected to be shown in movie theaters, but you can
Yeah.
find them elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Pure cinema and suspense.
Mhm.
When we talk about suspense, how would you put it across in a few words? When we say suspense versus, I would not want to take the word mystery here, but just pure suspense.
Well, once again, Hitchcock is the absolute greatest example of that because he could do things that were pure cinema and
Yeah.
at the same time keep audiences very much in suspense.
Yeah.
Because I mentioned before that long cleanup after the murder in Psycho.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why audiences are gazing at that almost without blinking is because they're wondering if something else will happen. And when it doesn't for quite a while, then that's
Yeah.
more surprising than if something did happen. So
Yeah.
Hitchcock was really able to combine those things. Other filmmakers, probably not so much. Other filmmakers, I think, when they want to really make the audience wonder what's going to happen next, I'm in suspense, they're
Yeah.
generally working more with dialogue, with characters, with storytelling, more
Yeah.
than with pure cinema, probably.
Yeah. Yeah. So Hitchcock was one of the rarest combining pure cinema with the narrative cinema.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are certainly others. Another movie that comes to my mind right away is the very great film from the late 60s, 2001: A Space Odyssey by Stanley
Yeah.
Kubrick.
Yeah.
And there we have also pure cinema, and I would say two different ways. One way is that in that magnificent science fiction movie, you have shots just of regular story things. You know, the spacecraft going through space, the spacecraft docking with another spacecraft, where the
Yeah.
shots go on for such a long time. They
Yeah.
don't have to go on that long to get the story told. It's just
Yeah.
because Kubrick loves the images and he can't bear taking them off the screen, so he leaves them for a long time and hopes the audience won't get bored. In a way, that's a kind of pure cinema. However, at the climax of that film, when one of the astronauts goes through what's usually called the Stargate, you then have genuine abstract cinema. You have things on the screen which, in some cases, sometimes you see images that you can recognize. Other times, it is just shape, form, color, movement for their own sakes. And that really is pure cinema. It's only for one part of that movie, but it goes on for a while, and it's really, really fascinating. That
Mm.
movie came out in 1968. You
Yeah.
heard about the 60s, the
Yeah.
age of psychedelia. Okay, if 2001 A Space Odyssey came out now, I'm not sure that it would attract much of an audience at all. But in the
Mhm.
late 60s, when people wanted to see a movie that would be a trip, 2001 A Space Odyssey did it, and they were purely happy to take the pure cinema. It delighted them.
Hmm. It's very interesting, David, so that you mentioned if 2001 came now, it might not have a lot of audience. When you talk about, when we talk about Hitchcock now, releasing now, what is your take there in terms of his audience?
Well, in terms of both 2001 A Space Odyssey and Hitchcock, uh, audiences still watch these things. You
Yeah,
know, you can
yeah,
get them on disc anytime you want. You can see them streaming anytime you want. So they're
yeah,
there, and people really, really, really like these movies to this day. So they have
yeah.
retained their popularity. Now, it's possible that the big audience for 2001 A Space Odyssey is leftover hippies, you know, who liked the movie in 1968 and they're having a nostalgia trip. But I honestly do think that a lot of younger people love these movies very much. It's a long time since I've shown 2001 A Space Odyssey in one of my classes, partly because it's too long. And usually class sessions aren't long enough to squeeze it all in. But I show Hitchcock films all the time, and students really take to them. Young people in their late teens and their early 20s. So those movies still absolutely have an audience.
So tell me, David, so now we are talking about times 2025 post. We have traveled a lot of journey post COVID as well. And the face has changed lot of things in terms of uh, the taste of the audience. Now we are exposed to all kinds of cinema. We are exposed to a lot of Instagram, TikToking, the attention span. So many things are happening. And do you think cinema still stands in this audience the way it used to stand now?
Well, you know, I hear a lot about this attention span business, and I'm really not too clear about how that is playing out nowadays. Again, I show films, especially Hitchcock films, but lots and lots of films to my students all the time, and you know, my college students. And I'm not really sure how much attention they're paying. I insist on screening films in the classroom so that at least I know they're there and at least I know they're faced in the direction of the screen. But after that, I can't really tell what's going on. I'm hoping that their attention spans are remaining alert enough for them to take in an entire movie. Certainly, times have changed. And it used to be people would go to double features in a movie theater and watch two movies in a row, sitting in a theater seat that might not even be all that comfortable, depending on the theater. And that was considered wonderful entertainment. Nowadays, of course, people are always watching things and changing things, and you can use the pause button, all of that. But I certainly hope that what I will call long form cinema, which is feature films, an hour and a half or 2 hours in length, I certainly hope that people are watching them and watching them carefully and watching them with pleasure. But where that's going, whether that's really still the case, whether that will be to continue to be the case, I really can't be sure. I certainly hope so. Somebody once suggested that in the future, going to the movies would kind of like be going to the theater is now. You don't do it all that often. When you do it, it's a kind of a special event. The rest of the time, you just watch stuff on your screen at home in your living room. And I hope that people will keep going to movie theaters, or at least get a nice big screen in their living room and watch it without using the pause button as much as possible, because the pleasure of watching a feature film from beginning to end, the way it was intended to be shown and seen, is for me still one of the great pleasures of life. And I hope people don't lose sight of it.
Do you think those golden era of cinema, the era of Hitchcock and the era of Kubrick and Godard, would you see that coming back?
Oh, probably not. And I am one of those old people that you've heard so much about. So, maybe my faith in the future is just because it's partly just nostalgia. But I really, I try to combat my natural prejudices toward the things that I grew up with by realizing that what people are growing up with now has its own merits. It may not be for me. I
Yeah,
often say when I'm coming out of a new movie, it's not for my demographic. It was made
yeah.
for the people who are under 18, or the people who are under 25, or the people who are under 30. It wasn't made for me, but I can recognize how it might appeal to those people. And for them, it might be as great a work of art as a Hitchcock or a Godard or a Kubrick film is a work of art for me. So the arts are always changing. There's no such thing as progress. It's just always different, different, different. So I keep my loyalty to the stuff I grew up with and the stuff I came of age with and the stuff I studied for a great deal of my life. And I try to keep my mind as open as I can to the stuff that's going on now that's new and fresh and unusual. It may not be made for me, but I can do my best to at least try to appreciate it. I'll just add one more thing. Martin Scorsese said, controversially, within the past few years, that the comic book movies that have such huge popularity now, he said they aren't cinema. Well, that's ridiculous. Of course they're cinema. They're made out of moving pictures. That's what cinema means. That's what cinema is. However, I know what he meant. For me, those movies don't have the kind of emotion, the kind of psychology, the kinds of things that I value the most in the movies. And I think that's what Marty meant as well. But that said, I always try to keep my mind open to these new things, and I recognize that on some level, it's all cinema. Cinema, movies, motion pictures, films, they're not dead. They're still coming out, and I'm sure a lot of still ones are being made as we speak.
David, so what are your thoughts about filmmakers making pure cinema today? Do you have anyone's names that you would like to take, that these are the people that you should go and watch?
Oh my golly. I'm not sure what the names would be. There are certain filmmakers who are much more daring, much bolder than others. I will just
Yeah.
mention one thing. I just saw a day or two ago. I saw a brand new horror movie, 2025, called Bring Her Back. And it's a horror film, and it's got a lot of blood in it and a lot of gore in it. And but it's got a real story. It's got real characters, and it's not pure cinema in the abstract sense. But I found the camera positions, the camera angles, the camera movements, and above all, the editing to be as just tremendously kinetic, full of surprise, full of artistic merit, full of real value. So on the one hand, you have this bloody, horrible horror movie where people are doing horrible things to each other. And on the other hand, you have an exercise in almost pure shape, movement, color. That's an example made by a couple of brothers. Their name is Philippou. And I have to say, I think they have genuine talent, and I hope they keep in this direction. Danny Philippou and Michael Philippou. I hope they don't lose their nerve and start to make ordinary movies, because for the moment at least, I think they may be on the cutting edge.
So, do you believe that pure cinema can still come back as a commercial cinema the way Hitchcock did?
It can, if there are really gifted filmmakers who can pull it off and who want to do that. Yeah. I will mention, I keep mentioning once in a while, avant-garde film, experimental film, not meant to be shown in movie theaters. There are plenty of people making that kind of cinema, and it's intensely personal. And you may make your movie with a very small crew, or you may make it all by yourself with your own nowadays video camera, possibly film camera, and you do your own editing and you do your own everything. And there are still people doing that. And some of them are doing things very, very close to pure cinema. Also, more of the classic avant-garde film is available on DVD nowadays. You go to the Criterion Collection and you can get work by Stan Brakhage and Hollis Frampton and people like that. And they're still very much making movies now doing that. But in terms of stuff that's in the movie theaters, again, whether or not there are people who are going to be as daring and gifted as Hitchcock was, or
Yeah.
as daring and willing to let go a lot of the audience, willing to lose a lot of the audience the way Godard was, that's just going to depend on individual personalities, and some of them may come and go. The ones
Yeah.
who really take chances may, in fact, lose their audience and not be able to keep working, at least not making theatrical films. But
Yeah.
my hat is off to all of them. Keep on trying, folks. Try to take those risks. Try to push that envelope, because cinema for its own sake is well worth pursuing. It's kind of like talking about a painter. Is the painter going to paint pictures of pretty things, or is the painter going to be interested in what the paint looks like on the canvas? And the greatest painters, maybe not all of them, but many of them, are interested in both and able to do both with equal skill and brilliance.
No,
That's what I'm hoping for.
that's a wonderful one, David. So that's going to give a lot of hope to a lot of artists and filmmakers listening to the podcast, that you need to find your own way.
Yeah.
What sort of comes from inside of you, that is sort of you. But yes, being commercially successful is every filmmaker's dream, because everyone wants to be commercially successful. At the same time, create the work of art. When you talk about Scorsese, David, sir, because you've written works about Scorsese a lot. How would you unfold Scorsese, if I may just ask? Would you say, okay, he is somebody who has made works that is pure cinema and narrative driven? What are your thoughts on Scorsese a bit? Because I just wanted to loop him in.
Yeah, no, that's just fine. I think he's the greatest living American filmmaker, and I've been saying
Yeah,
that for a very long time.
yeah,
One thing I'll mention right away is at the very, very, very end, the last few seconds of his movie, The Last Temptation of Christ, there is a little bit of really abstract cinema on the screen. And that is like avant-garde filmmaking. It's really, really daring and bold. But again, it's only a few seconds, and it's at the very, very end of the movie. But it's meant to sort of convey how
yeah,
unexpressible being crucified the way Jesus was
yeah,
is. And
yeah,
rather than just show more of it on the screen, he opts for that at the very, very end of his movie. Otherwise, I think Scorsese's very, very best movies, and I think his greatest movie is Taxi Driver. Again,
yes,
another bloody movie. So look
yes.
out for that one if you don't like just people, getting having bad things that happen on the screen. But in that movie, the camera work of it, the editing of it, above all, some of the sound of it is very, very daring, very, very bold. And in a Hitchcockian sense, it is, I think, very pure cinema. I'll just mention one moment, and it's certainly not abstract, but there's a moment when you realize the character played by Robert De Niro, his name is Travis Bickle, is going crazier and crazier and probably getting more and more dangerous. But you're not sure what he's going to do next. You wanted to talk about suspense. It's very suspenseful. What's going to happen next? There's a cut to a new place. It's somewhere outdoors. And we quickly discover that it's Travis Bickle, and he's out at a political rally, and he's going to try to kill somebody there. Okay. But the shot opens with a shot of his hands. And his hand goes up, and the camera goes up as he pops some pills into his mouth. So you realize these pills are some sort of drug, some sort of upper that's probably going to make him more dangerous than ever. But when the camera goes up his body, from his hands down sort of at waist level, up to his head, you see he suddenly shaved off his head, and he has this old-fashioned mohawk hairdo, and it is stunning, because it's the first time we've seen that in the movie, and we weren't expecting it. Now, would it be the same if we just cut to him in the park and we say, oh, he got a new haircut? Okay. But starting in the middle of his body and then going up along with his hands to his mouth, and then you see this ridiculous, well, it was ridiculous at the time, haircut, which shows that he is now over the edge. This guy is capable of anything. It's not because he has the haircut. That haircut is a sign that he is no longer the character we've been getting to know. He's now that character to the nth degree, and we can't tell what's going to happen next. So that's an example of its narrative. It's got a character, but it's almost as pure as cinema can get.
Yeah, lovely. Lovely. Do you think Scorsese would be thinking about his audience the way Hitchcock would be thinking?
Well, again, it's not just a filmmaker's interest and privilege to think about the audience. It's a filmmaker's necessity if they want to keep on making
Yeah.
movies. But Marty Scorsese has really, really taken as many risks as any, I think, major commercially successful filmmaker. The risks have not always paid off. I don't like all of his movies, but
Yeah.
so many of them have paid off really, really well. So I think, if any young filmmaker out there wants a model to follow who would please me, then try study the films of Martin Scorsese, because they are very, very brilliant. Most of them, not all of them, and they really have. He cares so much about cinema for its own sake, but at the same time, he's also quite brilliant at producing terrific stories and characters and all that sort of thing. So, he's maybe the best example I can think. I'm sure there are other examples out there, but for somebody who's made a number of movies that have taken any number of risks, and Scorsese absolutely has thought about his audience, but not to the exclusion of everything else. I think maybe it was when he was making Goodfellas and I was talking with him, and he said he wasn't really thinking that it was going to have that huge of an audience. Of course, it did have a huge audience. We're going to have that huge an audience. He said the length alone, because it's going to be something like 2.5 hours. So he recognized, he was kind of pushing the envelope here, and every one of his fans might not come all the way along on this particular film. The Last Temptation of Christ was made very, very much out of his own personal, deep religious conviction.
Yeah.
And he made it, I think, more for that reason and more just for his own spiritual needs than for, pleasing an audience somewhere out there. So, I think that's that's very much in the mix. And that's the kind of film that maybe shows him not thinking so much about the audience because he feels compelled to make this movie. And in that case, the movie did not turn out completely successfully, in my opinion, and I think in his opinion. But it's still a remarkable film in a lot of different ways. I'll mention one more Scorsese film. It's not one of his biggest hits, but Shutter Island, which is basically a horror movie, a mystery with Leonardo DiCaprio and others. And that's a movie which I see as being very, very religious, even though I think a lot of people could see that whole movie and really pay attention and really think it was interesting and never see a religious dimension in it at all. But if you hear the things that some of the characters say, sometimes literally about God, you will find out that movie too has a religious dimension. But in The Last Temptation of Christ, and also in a more recent movie of his, Silence, that religious dimension is right on the surface. In some other movies, I think it's there, but it's sort of buried a little bit. You have to look for it. But once you start to perceive it, then it's very definitely there. I'll mention one more thing. Roger Ebert wrote a whole book about Scorsese many years ago, the great film critic Roger Ebert. And Roger describes a moment which I think is really interesting. He was with Marty Scorsese in the editing room, and Scorsese was putting together a couple of shots. And Ebert was kind of enthusiastic about the way these two shots fit together. And of course, it's just the way Scorsese intended it. And at this point, according to Ebert in his book, Scorsese took a pair of editing scissors and just snipped off a frame. Now, that's okay. This is back in the days of editing on film, and there's 24 frames in every second of film, so snipping off a frame doesn't seem to be that big a deal. But Ebert felt that it was perfect the way it was. And Marty said, but let's let it breathe. Let's not make it, I'm not, this is my speaking, not the words Marty Scorsese used, but let's let it have some spontaneity, some flexibility. Let's leave things open a little bit to chance. And I think by slipping off that one frame, on one level it meant nothing, but on a level of it was like almost a symbolic gesture. Let's just give it some room to breathe. Let's not have it go like clockwork. This is not a machine that we're making here. Now, many movies are, I think, entertainment machines, but that's not what Marty Scorsese makes.
Yeah. Lovely. Lovely, 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 David sir. So wonderful to have you again and talk about two of the most of my favorite filmmakers. Now I'm going to be slightly wicked and ask you, if you had to be choosing between Hitchcock and Scorsese, who would that be?
Well, what can I say? Hitchcock has been, again, I'm one of those old guys you've heard so much about. So Hitchcock has been my official favorite filmmaker for many, many years. But he's not the only favorite filmmaker. So Hitchcock is probably still number one in my book. But again, Scorsese, as I said before, is, I think, the greatest living American filmmaker. Hitchcock was British and American. But
Wow.
Scorsese is purely American. So and you know, just in terms of ranking filmmakers, Hitchcock is probably at the top. Scorsese would be very close under that. But here's the thing: I don't really believe in having a favorite this or a favorite that. I don't even believe in having lists very much because
Yes.
I'm always leaving people off. So here's another filmmaker we haven't even mentioned: the great late Soviet filmmaker. He eventually had to leave the Soviet Union, Andrei Tarkovsky.
Yeah.
He made films with stories, with
Yeah.
characters,
Yeah.
but sometimes the story is so hard to follow,
Yeah.
but the stuff on the screen is so magnificent
Yes.
that it becomes something that I could even almost call pure cinema. So there's
Yeah.
another filmmaker who would be way, way near the top of any list that I were to make. And he died a long time ago, much too early, but he has a
Yeah.
disciple, Alexander Sakharov, who has worked along similar lines. So, you know, there are various filmmakers who can be put under the pure cinema line, and not all the filmmakers who I really love do anything much like pure cinema. I really love the films of John Cassavetes,
Yeah.
another filmmaker who died much too early. And his movies are regular story movies with acting and dialogue and all of that, but few moments in them I think I would call pure cinema. So he's a very different kind of filmmaker, but also a great favorite of mine. So, you know, don't choose favorites, folks. Don't make lists. As Scorsese apparently said, let it breathe, you know? My tastes are always changing from moment to moment, and I think that's okay.
Yeah, that is so lovely, so lovely. Okay, some recommendations that artists can read when it comes to the works of Hitchcock, Pure Cinema, Suspense, Scorsese, anything that you would recommend to read and watch.
Well, sure. If you're an aspiring filmmaker, or even if you just like movies, you can't do better than to start off with the work of Hitchcock. And I would recommend, if I can speak in very broad terms here, his movies of the 1950s. I think that's when he had a string of tremendous masterpieces. I'll mention a few: Strangers on a Train, Vertigo, which I've talked about. Psycho comes in 1960, so it's in a way the very end of the 1950s. North by Northwest, which is a superb movie it's in its own right as well. So, you know, those movies and a few others are very, very, very great Hitchcock movies. Start with Hitchcock, start with the Hitchcock movies of the 1950s. Not every single one, but many of them are masterpieces. And maybe The Birds, too, which has its problems, but it ends with something that is, in a way, close to pure cinema. So that's fine there. As for Marty Scorsese, start with Taxi Driver if you can take the blood and the gore. Also, watch Shutter Island, which is one of my favorites of his. Go back to his earlier films. Mean Streets is a sensational movie. Mean Streets recently released again on disc, and it looks just magnificent, and it's just an excellent, excellent movie. Again, so many of his movies that deal with criminals and crime and stuff are just in addition to their compelling stories, they're really just superb cinema. I'll mention once again Goodfellas too, which is a really, really great film. So, you know, Goodfellas, Taxi Driver, movies like that. If you want to try a very different kind of a film and a filmmaker who is not nowadays you don't hear about so often, I mentioned John Cassavetes. Watch his movie from 1974, A Woman Under the Influence, starring his wife Jenna Rollins, a very great actress, and the great Peter Falk, and a wonderful performance of his. Was for many years before I stopped having favorites, my official favorite film. It's flawed. It has problems. It's too long. There are some parts in it that don't completely make sense, but I find it one of the most emotionally stunning films ever made. So watch A Woman Under the Influence and the movie after that in the 1970s, Opening Night by John Cassavetes. I left one out, The Killing of a Chinese Bookie. These are all very, very great films, and they're so different from standard commercial film, that that they will give you things that at least take you in the direction of not pure cinema, but cinema which breaks all the commercial molds. I got to mention one more thing, Suchita, because you mentioned how much thinking of the audience. The following thing apparently really happened. Scorsese was sitting in a preview screening of one of his movies, The Killing of a Chinese Bookie, with an audience. And there was an action suspense scene in the movie, and the audience was absolutely riveted by it. And Scorsese, the person sitting next to him, saw was very uncomfortable and very unhappy. And when the person came out, said, "You look like you were squirming during the big suspense scene. The audience was so into it." And Scorsese said, "It was too easy. I made it too easy for him." And so he re-edited the film.
Wow.
He edited the sequence to make it less easy for the audience. In other words, unlike Hitchcock, he did not want to manipulate the audience. He wanted the audience to always be discovering a sense of mystery from moment to moment as the story unfolded. Now, on the Criterion Collection edition of that film on disc and probably elsewhere, you can get both versions of the film, the original cut and the slightly shortened cut that he re-edited. And I think they're both magnificent. So, Scorsese is a good example of a filmmaker who really didn't think that much about the audience and made a number of what I regard as absolutely brilliant films.
Wow. Wow, David. So thank you so much. I so appreciate this. You doing this again with us.